Saga and Jon are driving through a dense forest in Finland. They are heading towards Saga's grandmother's old house, and even though it is in ruins, they plan to restore it to live there and start a new life. Saga wishes to raise her children in the middle of the nature that shaped her childhood. Jon, however, is terrified of the massive expense the renovation will take and the absolute isolation of the location. As they walk around the surroundings, Jon notices unsettling details in the vegetation. He sees branches shaped like hands and a giant tree with a bump resembling a stomach. Saga explains to him that, according to her grandmother, the forest responds to how it is spoken to and holds on to what belongs to it. Driven by their desire to become parents, they end up having sex on the roots of that tree so she can conceive. 9 months later, the scene jumps to the delivery room. Jon ends up covered in blood while Saga suffers going through childbirth. When the baby is born, the nurses rush him away amid whispers and suspicious looks. Saga panics and tearfully demands to know what is wrong with her son, but the doctors administer a sedative, leaving her asleep for hours. When she wakes up, Saga sees her newborn near the window. Jon walks in with flowers to congratulate her. He opens the curtains to see the boy, but when the sunlight touches his skin, the creature screams uncontrollably. His raspy cry sounds like that of a sick adult, and his body is covered in strange dark fur, as if he were a creature rather than a baby. A nurse explains to Saga in Finnish that the baby has unusual characteristics, suggesting she seek therapy. Since Jon doesn't understand, Saga lies to him, assuring him that everything is fine because she doesn't want to delay their return to the house in the forest. Once settled in, the baby's relentless crying echoes through the house and triggers a reaction from the forest, with several branches heard cracking. When trying to breastfeed him, the creature brutally bites her breast, making her bleed. The baby enjoys the taste of blood and begins to feed eagerly, preferring that blood over breast milk. Hours later, the baby cries hysterically every time Saga touches him, and his skin hardens upon maternal contact. Jon steps in and cleans him in the sink, where both notice that the baby's body looks more like that of a developing wild animal than a human's. That night, Saga notices the bite almost ripped her nipple off. On top of that, she suffers abnormal postpartum bleeding. Since the creature won't sleep, they bring him to bed. There, the newborn lifts his head and tries to crawl, casting unsettling glances at Saga. His nails grow sharp and squeeze his mother's arm, breaking her skin. The next morning, her mother, her sister Taru, and her niece Anna arrive for a visit. While Taru congratulates them on their beautiful house, her mother criticizes her for isolating herself and pausing her work. She reminds her that even as a child she was very solitary and preferred trees over people, but that doesn't mean her life is fine. Jon appears with the crying baby. The grandmother tries to hold him, but the creature rips off her earring with a brutal pull. Blood gushes out, but the woman, with absolute coldness, asks for her briefcase and stitches up her own wound in front of everyone without anesthesia and showing no pain. Meanwhile, the baby calms down by sucking the blood off the earring. Alone, Saga confesses to her mother her fear that something is wrong with her son due to his aggressiveness. The chat is cut short when the other guests arrive for the housewarming party. Everyone notices that the baby looks like a small goblin with an unbearable cry. The adults remain silent, but the children show direct fear toward him. Saga discovers that sunlight severely bothers the creature, but a breeze from the forest moves the curtain to cover him and lull him to sleep. When Jon announces to everyone that the baby will be named Christian, the forest responds with the sound of branches and a sudden gust of wind. Saga interrupts him in front of everyone and declares that the creature will be named Kura. At that moment, sunlight touches Kura, causing severe burns with massive blisters breaking out instantly. Saga rushes inside to tend to him, leaving the guests feeling so uncomfortable that they leave early. Jon confronts her about the name change, but she insists that Kura has a medical condition regarding the son, and that something strange is going on with him. A week later, Taru notices Saga taking Kura deep into the forest. It is the only place where the creature sleeps peacefully, letting out chuckles that make the trees make noises. Outside, Jon cleans old cars and rusted iron parts that Saga's late father had placed in a circle around the house. Taru mentions to Jon that her father relied on a legend about how cold iron burns and keeps certain creatures away. Jon brushes it off, thinking it was the nonsense of an alcoholic, and walks away without paying attention. However, that very night, Saga discovers in front of the mirror that a small hump is forming on her back, and a lot of body hair is growing on her. When Jon comes in looking for intimacy, Saga realizes that Kura is standing completely upright in the crib. He looks at them with a demonic face, giving her such a scare that she moves the crib to another room to care for him alone. After falling asleep and waking up to a phone call from her mother, she discovers that the creature has disappeared despite the crib's high bars. Searching for him, she hears a growl and finds Kura playing with a plant that has pierced the foundation and the carpet. Saga tears the carpet and notices the wood underneath is so soft that she breaks it with her hands, uncovering a deep layer of dirt filled with thousands of insects. Suddenly, a thick branch emerges from the hole, grabs her wrist and tries to drag her down, causing her to pass out. Jon finds her lying there the next day, and ignoring her story, demands she get ready to take the child to the pediatrician. At the doctor's office, the pediatrician examines the creature and assures them there is no issue, attributing it to very advanced physical development and skin sensitivity. She downplays his wild behavior and rejection of clothes or milk, leaving Saga upset because no one understands the severity of the situation. Upon returning, they argue because Saga refuses to breastfeed him due to the unbearable pain caused by the baby's bites. The fight is interrupted by the arrival of Jon's parents. His father, a pastor, brings cold iron rods as a gift and proposes blessing the newborn with holy water. Saga enthusiastically agrees to see if the water triggers a different reaction in Kura. The blessing finishes without incident. However, minutes later, Kura lets out a heartbreaking scream. Jon discovers that the child has a severe burn on his hand from touching his father's cold iron rods, even though they were not hot. Jon gets upset and dismisses his parents to put the child to bed. Alone in the living room, Saga lets out a macabre laugh as she confirms that the legend of cold iron is true and that her son is not human. The next day, Saga goes to town and buys a jar of fresh blood at a butcher shop. She fills a baby bottle with blood and gives it to Kura, who drinks it quickly and falls peacefully asleep, allowing Saga to hide more jars in the hole under the carpet. At dinner, Jon demands that she see a psychiatrist. Saga gets upset at feeling treated like she's crazy, triggering a heated argument. Jon sleeps in another room and leaves for work very early without saying goodbye. Alone in the house, she hears Kura crying and thrashing violently. She approaches the crib and screams forcefully at him to be quiet. Instantly, the tree branches grow wildly over the windows, blocking out the light completely. In the darkness, Saga loses consciousness. Waking up shortly after, she feels pain in her arm and discovers a bleeding bite mark. Kura fed on her while she was unconscious. The creature, now the size of an older child, walks toward her threateningly. Saga grabs a cold iron poker to ward him off and runs to lock herself in the bathroom to call her mother. While sobbing and begging for help, Kura slams against the door, nearly breaking the lock. Panic causes Saga to pass out again. She magically awakens in the middle of the snowy forest, walks guided by Kura's crying, and finds him devouring a wild rabbit in the snow. Saga returns to the house with Kura in her arms, and discovers that Jon has already returned and found the bags of blood under the floorboards. He is furious upon realizing she is feeding their son blood. Both struggle over the bag, which bursts and completely covers them in red liquid. Despite everything, Jon assumes his wife's erratic behavior is due to exhaustion and postpartum depression from the isolation. He proposes she take a full day off, having made a reservation for her at a luxurious hotel in town so she can relax while he takes care of Kura. Saga accepts and travels to town to check into the hotel. Minutes before her massage, she looks in the mirror and freezes. The skin on her abdomen is turning hard like the bark of an old tree, and her nails are black, feeling extreme exhaustion. Despite the scare, she goes to a restaurant to meet up with some friends. Shortly after, a baby at a nearby table begins to cry. Saga stops listening to her friends, the crying echoes in her head like torment. An unbearable itch begins to overcome her, driving her to scratch frantically, breaking her skin and bleeding in front of everyone. Unable to bear it, Saga leaps up and runs into the restaurant's kitchen. Taking advantage of a distraction, she steals a large piece of raw meat and rushes out to catch a bus back to the forest. Getting off, she runs barefoot over the dirt and snow until she reaches the property. She enters, snatches Kura from Jon, and when he demands an explanation, she responds, using an incomprehensible ancient language. She then locks herself inside Kura's room. She gives the raw meat to the creature to devour greedily, and as he feeds, Saga notices her itch disappear and her skin calm down. The next morning, Jon calls Saga's sister, Taru, asking her to intervene. Taru arrives with her daughter Anna, and when confronting Saga, Saga assures her that Kura is normal and that the only one acting like a monster is Taru, bringing up conflicts from their childhood. While they argue, little Anna walks into Kura's room. Seconds later, a terrifying scream shakes the house. Jon and Taru run in and find the girl crying with blood on her hand. Kura has just ripped off her finger and is calmly eating it. Despite everything, Jon and Taru act blinded and directly blame Saga for the tragedy. claiming her madness caused it. Taru takes her daughter to the hospital, screaming at Saga that she is a nuisance. Left alone, Saga unearths another piece of raw meat for Kura. However, she decides to sample the meat herself, discovering that the taste of blood is pleasant and restores energy throughout her entire body. From that day on, Saga surrenders to her son's wild nature, playing and sleeping together on the dirt inside the hole, surrounded by insects. Her skin regains its flexibility and her abdomen stops being stiff. When Jon returns and observes them sleeping in the hole, he fills with rage and decides to assert himself to raise the child in a civilized manner. He pulls him out of the pit, sits him at the table, and forces him to eat baby food with a metal spoon. The creature rejects the food and throws the spoon at him. Jon tries to force it in, but Saga intervenes. She reminds him that cold metal causes severe burns, gives a piece of raw meat to Kura, and demands her husband accept that the child is not normal and can never be raised as such. That night, Saga tries to initiate intimacy with Jon, but he remains cold. He confesses that he regrets making her a mother, blaming her for ruining his dream of having a large family by raising Kura like an animal. He announces his decision to file for divorce and seek full custody of the child, revealing that he has already agreed with her parents to send her to a psychiatric facility for life. Immediately, Jon runs to the room, grabs Kura, and tries to flee the house to take him far away. A violent struggle erupts in the hallway with Saga, while the creature lets out a gut-wrenching cry that echoes through the forest. In response to Kura's desperation, the vegetation reacts violently, and tree branches crash through the windows and break through the house walls, causing a massive trunk to emerge from the floor hole and impale Jon through the chest, killing him instantly. As Jon's lifeless body falls, Kura approaches to begin feeding on his father's blood. Saga, driven by her wild transformation, plunges her hand into the wound in her husband's chest to rip out his heart and share it with her son, holding a blood feast in the middle of the living room. Moments later, the forest begins to emit a sound calling them from outside. And as the door opens, the trees come alive and move slowly to receive Kura as their new guardian. The creature walks into the snow without the sun ever harming him again, turning around to give his mother an understanding smile, to which Saga responds with immense happiness, realizing she has fulfilled her purpose.